The surgical suite was a cathedral of cold light and whispered urgency. Overhead lamps bathed the room in a sterile glow, casting sharp shadows across gleaming steel instruments laid out like relics on a silver altar. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and something metallic like rain on old iron. Machines hummed and beeped in steady rhythms, a mechanical chorus keeping time with the fragile life stretched out on the table beneath their watchful glow. Dr. Ava Winters stood at the head of the table, her gloved hands poised in tense precision. She was young, but the set of her shoulders and the calm determination etched on her face made her appear older, more seasoned than her years. Tonight, however, her composure wavered at the edges. This was supposed to be a routine procedure, a straightforward excision of a suspected melanoma. Yet, the scans had been puzzling the texture unusual. Ava had reviewed them again and again, convincing herself there was a logical explanation. There always was. The patient, Hank Mason, lay unmoving beneath the thin, sterile drape. His breathing was slow and steady under anesthesia, his body surrendered completely to the hands of strangers. A man in his mid-60s, Hank had the sturdy frame of someone who had spent a lifetime in physical labor, his skin weathered by years of wind and sun. To look at him now, silent and still, was to see a life reduced to a series of vital signs displayed in glowing green numbers. Scalpel. Ava said softly, her voice barely louder than the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator. A nurse placed the instrument into her waiting hand with practiced ease. The first incision was smooth, practiced, almost graceful. There was no reason for the faint ripple of unease that ran through Ava as she worked. She reminded herself that she had done this countless times before, that muscle memory would carry her through. And yet, something felt wrong. The tissue beneath her blade resisted in a way that was subtle but unmistakable. Not tough like scar tissue, nor soft like fat. It was different, alien. She paused, her breath catching. "Retractor," she murmured, and the nurse complied, widening the opening for better visibility. The sight that met Ava's eyes made her heart stutter. Underneath the outer layer of skin, a strange network of fibrous strands sprawled outward like roots of a tree or the delicate web of a spider. They pulsed faintly in time with Hank's heartbeat, a grotesque mimicry of life. The surgical team shifted uneasily, exchanging glances. Ava leaned closer, unable to tear her gaze away. With trembling precision, she cut a little deeper, following the strands to their center. There, nestled like the heart of some strange organism, was something metallic, a glint of silver beneath flesh. Her breath came sharp and fast. This was no tumor. This was something else entirely. Something that had been living inside Hank Mason for a very long time. The room seemed to tilt, the steady beeping of the monitor growing louder, almost frantic. A nurse whispered a prayer under her breath. Ava straightened, her voice hoarse but clear. "Oh my God," she said, her words slicing through the sterile air. "This isn't cancer." The small, lakeside town of Harbor Ridge stirred slowly awake each morning, wrapped in the soft hush of waves lapping against the distant shore. Rows of modest homes lined quiet streets, their wooden porches weathered by decades of sun and salt air. In winter, the lake froze over its vast surface, becoming a sheet of dull gray glass that reflected the pale Michigan sky. It was a town that thrived on routine and familiarity, a place where everyone knew the sound of their neighbor's truck engine, and where small secrets stayed tucked behind lace curtains. In a white two-story house with fading blue shutters, Hank Mason rose each day before dawn. His movements were slow but deliberate, shaped by years of hard labor. Even in retirement, he maintained the same rhythm that had carried him through 30 years as a construction foreman. He dressed in flannel and work boots, hands roughened and scarred, a living testament to a life built on effort and endurance. To outsiders, Hank seemed unshakable. He was a man of few words, one who believed that strength was measured by what you could carry in silence. Beneath that stoic exterior, however, lived decades of unspoken memories, most from a place half a world away during a war he never fully left behind. Nora Mason. His wife of 46 years moved through the house with quiet efficiency. Where Hank was flint and steel, Nora was warmth and subtlety. She had been a teacher for most of her life, shaping young minds with patience and resolve. Few knew that before she had ever stood at the front of a classroom, she had worked as a nurse in the final years of the Vietnam War. That chapter of her life was something she had locked away, a memory hidden even from her own daughter, Maya Mason. Their only child lived in Chicago now. A physician in a bustling emergency department, Maya had inherited her mother's compassion and her father's stubbornness. She visited when she could, though the 3-hour distance often felt greater than geography alone. There had been tension in recent years, misunderstandings, arguments left unresolved. Love remained, but it was layered beneath the sediment of time and unspoken grievances. On this particular January evening, a soft snow began to fall as Nora prepared Hank's favorite meal pot roast with root vegetables, the air rich with the scent of rosemary and onions. It was their anniversary, a quiet tradition celebrated each year in their own home. After dinner, they would dance slowly in the living room to the same song they had first danced to as newlyweds. While the roast simmered, Nora laid out Hank's good blue shirt on the bed. The fabric was slightly worn but still handsome, a gift she had given him 3 Christmases ago. She called up the stairs, wiping her hands on her apron. "Hank, about ready. Dinner's almost done." Hank emerged from the bathroom towel around his waist, his silver hair damp from the shower. Time had weathered his face but left behind a rugged strength. Nora still felt the same small flutter in her chest she had known when she first met him at a cousin's wedding decades ago. As she helped him slip into his shirt, her hands froze. Between his shoulder blades was a dark mole she had seen countless times over the years, but now it looked different. Once no larger than a pencil eraser, it had grown irregular, its edges jagged and its surface uneven. Most unsettling of all, it seemed to rise slightly above the skin, almost textured. A chill traced down Nora's spine. Memories stirred from her nursing days of warning signs and urgent diagnoses. She wanted to speak to demand he let her take a closer look, but she hesitated. Hank disliked fussing over health matters. In all their years together, he had been the type of man who only saw a doctor when absolutely necessary. She chose her words carefully. "Hank, when did this mole start changing?" He shrugged, brushing off her concern. "It's been there forever," he said simply, reaching for his comb, but Nora's unease lingered. Throughout their anniversary dinner, she found herself distracted, her gaze drifting again and again to Hank's back. He laughed and teased her gently, mistaking her watchfulness for nostalgia. When they danced in the living room after dinner, she pressed her cheek against his shoulder, trying to quiet the knot of worry tightening in her chest. The evening might have ended quietly if not for the surprise arrival of Jessica Maya's ex-sister-in-law and little Emma, their 5-year-old granddaughter. Snowflakes clung to their matching knit hats as they stepped inside, bringing laughter and warmth with them. Emma barreled into Hank's arms, giggling with delight. "Grandpa, I lost another tooth," she declared, her small voice bright with excitement. Hank swung her up and hugged her tightly, the stoic mask he wore for the world slipping away in the presence of his granddaughter. As he crouched to help Emma remove her snow boots, the child's voice suddenly shifted to confusion. "Grandpa," she said in her clear, innocent tone, "why is there a spider on your back?" The room went still. Jessica laughed nervously, assuming it was just a child's imagination. But Emma persisted, her tiny brow furrowed. "It looks like the spider we found in the bathtub, the one with the bumpy back." Nora's breath caught. She crossed the room quickly, her hands trembling. She lifted the back of Hank's shirt just enough to see and gasped. The mole had changed again, even since earlier that evening. Its borders stretched outward like thin legs, the center swollen and dark. The laughter that had filled the house moments earlier evaporated. Jessica stood frozen, eyes wide. Hank turned slowly, his expression puzzled, almost defensive. For Nora, the truth was sudden and undeniable. Whatever this was, it was no ordinary mole. Something was growing inside her husband, and it was spreading. In the cold silence that followed, the only sound was the distant rhythm of waves against the frozen lake, a reminder that beneath the surface unseen, Forces could shift and grow until they broke through without warning. The following morning, the world outside lay hushed beneath a new layer of snow. Harbor Ridge looked pristine and untouched, as if the events of the night before had been nothing more than a troubling dream. Yet, within the Mason household, the atmosphere was anything but peaceful. Nora had spent most of the night lying awake listening to Hank's uneven breathing. Each rise and fall of his chest was a reminder of what she had seen of the grotesque shape that now marred the skin she had once traced lovingly with her fingertips. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw it again. The dark center, the jagged edges, the way it seemed almost alive. Hank, for his part, remained stubbornly dismissive. At breakfast, he buttered his toast with the same calm he brought to every task, his broad shoulders squared, his jaw set. He refused to acknowledge the fear that hovered like a storm cloud between them. When Nora suggested they call the local clinic, he shook his head, unwilling to let concern disrupt his carefully controlled world. But Nora was resolute. There were things she had ignored in the past, small warnings brushed aside in the name of harmony. This would not be one of them. When she called Dr. Ava Winter's office and explained the situation, the young dermatologist's tone sharpened with urgency. She cleared her schedule and insisted Hank come in that very afternoon. The clinic was modern and stark, all clean lines and muted colors designed to soothe anxious patients. Nora sat beside Hank in the waiting room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Hank pretended to read a magazine, though his eyes never moved across the page. His knuckles were white where he gripped the paper. Dr. Ava Winters greeted them with a warm professionalism that belied the intensity in her eyes. She was younger than Nora had expected, perhaps in her late 30s, with an air of quiet authority that immediately inspired trust. After a brief introduction, she asked Hank to remove his shirt and lie face down on the examination table. The moment Ava saw the lesion, her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. To anyone else, it might have been missed entirely, but Nora caught at the slight tightening around the eyes, the controlled breath. It was the look of someone who had encountered something both unusual and troubling. With gloved hands, Ava examined the growth. She pressed gently along its borders, tracing the irregular pattern that radiated outward like the spokes of a wheel. The texture was unlike anything she had encountered in her training. It wasn't merely raised skin. It had depth, density, a structure that seemed to exist beneath the surface. "When did you first notice changes?" Ava asked, her voice neutral. "Recently," Nora answered quickly before Hank could downplay it. "It's been gradual for years, but the last few weeks, it's been different." Ava nodded, her face unreadable. She took photographs for documentation, then prepared to perform a biopsy. The procedure was quick, a small sample carefully extracted and sent to the lab. Hank barely flinched, his pride intact even as Nora's heart raced beside him. The results came back 2 days later. Ava called personally, her tone clipped and efficient. "The sample shows abnormal cells," she explained, "but they don't match typical melanoma patterns. I'd like to schedule an excision immediately to remove the entire growth for analysis." Nora felt both relief and dread. Relief that action would be taken, dread at what they might find. Hank agreed reluctantly, his voice gruff but steady. "Che. The first surgery. The surgical suite smelled of antiseptic and cold determination. Nora waited outside while Ava and Dr. Pierce, a seasoned surgeon, prepared their instruments. Hank lay unconscious beneath the lights, his breathing even and mechanical under anesthesia. Ava made the first incision with practiced precision. At first, everything appeared routine, but as she cut deeper, the tissue resisted. It was denser than expected, almost fibrous. She widened the opening, carefully retracting the skin to reveal the layers beneath. What she saw made her pulse quicken. Beneath the surface lay a network of pale strands interwoven like the roots of an ancient tree. They stretched outward, clinging to muscle and fascia, wrapping themselves around Hank's body as if claiming it. The strands pulsed faintly in time with his heartbeat, a grotesque mimicry of life. "This isn't scar tissue," Dr. Pierce murmured, his voice tight with unease. Ava leaned closer, following the tendrils toward their source. At the very center of the web, something metallic glinted under the surgical lights. Carefully, delicately, she teased it free from the surrounding tissue. The object emerged with a wet sound slick with blood and cellular debris. It was a fragment of metal, jagged and corroded, no larger than a fingernail. Ava held it up for Dr. Pierce to see. A bullet fragment, he said in disbelief. The room fell silent. For a moment, Ava could only stare at the piece of metal. How long had it been there? Decades, perhaps. The body should have rejected it, expelled it through infection or necrosis. Instead, it had built this strange structure around it, a living cage to contain and protect. Once the fragment was removed, Ava carefully excised the surrounding tissue, ensuring clean margins. The growth came away in a single grotesque piece to be sent immediately to pathology. She closed the incision with steady hands, though her mind raced with questions she could not yet answer. When Nora saw her husband wheeled into recovery, she felt a surge of hope. The worst, she thought, was behind them. The foreign object was gone, the danger removed. She was wrong. Key. The false, calm. For 2 days, Hank seemed to improve. His color returned, his appetite stirred, and his humor, gruff and understated, made brief appearances. Nora allowed herself to believe they had turned a corner. She even managed a tired smile when Maya arrived from Chicago, her professional gaze sweeping over her father with practiced precision. That night, the family sat together in the living room, the soft glow of a lamp casting gentle light across familiar faces. Nora dared to imagine a future in which this would be nothing more than a story they told years from now, a close call that ended happily. But in the dark hours before dawn, Hank awoke with a gasse. Day. The collapse. Nora found him sitting at the edge of the bed, his skin pale and clammy, his breath ragged. A fever burned through him, visible in the glassy sheen of his eyes. When she touched his back, she felt heat radiating from the surgical site, a terrifying intensity that spoke of something deeply wrong. By the time they reached the emergency department, Hank's condition had deteriorated further. Nurses rushed him onto a gurney, their movements a blur of efficiency and controlled panic. Dr. Ava appeared moments later, her expression grim as she examined the wound. The incision was inflamed, the surrounding skin mottled and discolored. Worse still, faint red lines radiated outward beneath the surface, spreading like cracks in ice. It was as if the web she had removed had begun to regrow. "This isn't a standard infection," Ava murmured more to herself than anyone else. Nora stood helplessly by as machines were hooked up, fluids administered, monitors activated. The steady beeping filled the room, a relentless reminder of how close they stood to losing him. Then, without warning, Hank's body convulsed. The monitor spiked into a shrill alarm as his heart rhythm faltered. "Code blue," a nurse shouted. Nora's world became a tunnel of sound and motion. She watched through a haze as Ava and the team fought to stabilize her husband. Chest compressions, oxygen, adrenaline, all the tools of modern medicine brought to bear against the fragile thread of life. And then, mercifully, a rhythm returned. The monitor's frantic beeping slowed, steadied. Hank lay still once more, but the line between survival and loss had never felt thinner. As dawn broke over Harbor Ridge, Nora sat beside her husband's hospital bed, her hands clasped tightly around his. The bullet fragment might have been removed, but whatever mystery it carried was far from over. Something remained inside Hank, a battle invisible to the eye raging beneath his skin. From somewhere deep within her memory, Nora recalled a lesson from her days as a nurse. The body remembers everything it has endured. Every wound, every scar, every foreign invader leaves a mark. Hank Mason's body was remembering now, and whatever it remembered, it was fighting back. If this story has gripped you so far, and you want to witness how it unfolds, remember to subscribe and stay connected for more haunting tales like this. The hospital room was dim, the blinds drawn to soften the glare of the winter sun. Machines whispered in rhythmic murmurs beside the bed, their lights blinking like distant stars. Hank lay motionless, sedated, his breath shallow but steady. Nora sat beside him, the curve of her spine bent with exhaustion. She had been there for hours, watching the subtle rise and fall of his chest as though sheer willpower could keep him tethered to the world. Maya stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Though she was a physician, trained to face life and death with clinical detachment, nothing had prepared her for seeing her father like this. It stripped away the layers of professionalism and left only the frightened daughter beneath. The night before, while the snow fell thick and silent outside, Hank had gripped Nora's hand with startling strength. His voice had been barely more than a rasp, but his words were clear. "There's a metal box. Back of my workbench. Combination is your birthday." Those words had echoed in Nora's mind ever since refusing to be silenced. There was no mistaking the urgency in his tone, the unspoken weight behind his final plea. She knew what she had to do. Denied. The box. At 3 a.m, while Maya kept vigil at the hospital, Nora drove home through empty streets. The snow muffled every sound, wrapping the world in a blanket of uneasy quiet. When she entered Hank's workshop, the familiar smell of sawdust and machine oil greeted her. His tools hung in perfect order, each one precisely placed a reflection of the man himself, disciplined, methodical, guarded. She knelt beside the heavy wooden workbench and ran her fingers along its underside until they caught on something cold and metallic. A small safe bolted firmly in place. Her hands shook as she entered the numbers of her birthday. A soft click broke the silence. Inside lay a collection of items carefully arranged as though they had been waiting for decades to be discovered. Dog tags dulled with age. A faded photograph of young soldiers, their faces sunburned and weary, standing before a helicopter. A medal, still in its pristine case, the ribbon faded but unmarked. And a sealed envelope, her name written across the front in Hank's unmistakable block handwriting. For a moment, Nora simply stared, her throat tight with a storm of emotions. She had known Hank since they were barely more than children themselves. They had built a life, raised a daughter, weathered the countless small storms of marriage. Yet here lay proof that there were parts of him she had never truly known. With trembling hands she opened the envelope. The letter inside was dated 20 years earlier. "My dearest Nora. If you're reading this, it means I never found the courage to tell you myself. Some truths grow too heavy to carry alone, but too dangerous to set down in the open. This is mine. In 1971, my unit received orders to secure a village near Quang Tri. We were told it harbored enemy combatants. When we arrived, there were only civilians, women, children, old men. Confusion turned to chaos. A shot rang out, though to this day I don't know who fired first. In the madness that followed, our commanding officer lost control. He ordered us to clear the village completely. I couldn't obey. I couldn't let it happen. I tackled him, tried to wrest the rifle away. In the struggle, he fired. The bullet struck me. I remember the heat, the impact, the way the world narrowed to a single point of pain. Afterward, the official report claimed we were ambushed. The officer was portrayed as a hero, killed in action, though he lived and was quietly reassigned. I was given a Purple Heart for my sacrifice. But that medal is a lie. It doesn't honor bravery. It conceals the truth. Only 3 others knew what really happened, Roy Wilson and Johnson. We swore to stay silent. We were young, scared, desperate to go home. But silence is its own kind of prison. I've carried it for nearly 50 years, buried deep like that bullet buried in my flesh. Now, as my body begins to fail, I fear the weight of it will crush me completely. If I never wake Nora, please know that everything I did afterward, every quiet moment, every act of love, was an attempt to be worthy of the life I was given and the lives that were spared that day. Yours always, Hank. Nora's vision blurred with tears. The workshop seemed to tilt around her as though the very foundations of her life had shifted. The man she had loved for nearly 5 decades was both the same and utterly changed. His silence, his nightmares, the shadows in his eyes, all of it made sense now. She placed the letter back into its envelope and returned to the hospital, the truth heavy in her hands. Test. Confrontation. When Nora arrived, Maya was waiting. The fatigue etched on her daughter's face was unmistakable, but beneath it burned a fierce determination. Maya had always suspected there was more to her father's past than he admitted. When Nora shared the contents of the letter, Maya listened in stunned silence. As the truth unfolded, her hands curled into fists at her sides. "So, all these years," Maya said finally, her voice low but sharp, "he's been carrying this alone, and we've been living with the fallout without even knowing why." Nora reached for her daughter's hand, but Maya pulled back, pacing the small space between the bed and the wall. "I'm a doctor, Mom. I've treated veterans with wounds like his, both physical and invisible. If he'd told me if he'd let me in, maybe I could have helped him." Nora's own guilt surged like a tide. She had her own secrets, her service as a nurse during the war, the things she had seen and done. She had hidden them just as carefully, believing silence would shield her family. "We both thought we were protecting you," she whispered. "Maybe we were wrong." Maya turned to face her mother, tears glittering in her eyes. "You were wrong. Secrets don't protect anyone. They just grow until they consume everything." The room fell into silence, broken only by the steady hiss of the ventilator. Hank remained still, caught between life and death, between past and present. The second revelation. Later that evening, Roy arrived. His face was lined with age and regret, his shoulders stooped beneath the weight of decades. He had served alongside Hank in Vietnam, and the moment he saw Nora's expression, he seemed to understand what had been uncovered. He sat at Hank's bedside, his rough hands trembling as he held the rail. "We swore we'd never speak of it," he said, his voice hoarse, "but silence has a cost. I've seen what it did to him, to all of us." Roy confessed that Wilson had died young, eaten away by cancer, while Johnson had taken his own life years later. That left only Hank and Roy, the last witnesses to a truth the world would never fully acknowledge. As Roy spoke, Nora realized that the bullet removed from Hank's back was more than a piece of metal. It was a symbol, a physical embodiment of the secret he had carried. Removing it had unleashed not just a medical crisis, but an emotional reckoning. The turning point. That night, Nora sat beside Hank, holding his hand as machines clicked and hummed around them. She leaned close, her voice barely a whisper. "I know the truth now, my love," she said. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore." For the first time in days, Hank stirred. His eyelids fluttered, then opened, revealing the faded blue of his eyes. They were filled with pain, but also relief. A single tear slipped down his temple. In that moment, the past and present merged. The war, the silence, the lies, all of it came into the light. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. If you've followed this story so far, make sure to subscribe so you won't miss what comes next, the conclusion of Hank's journey, and the legacy of truth he leaves behind. Spring arrived slowly in Harbor Ridge, melting the remnants of winter snow into streams that ran quietly toward the lake. The air smelled of thawing earth and new beginnings. For weeks, Hank's recovery had been measured in the smallest of victories. One steady breath, one cautious step, one night of uninterrupted sleep. The infection that had threatened to claim him gradually retreated under relentless treatment. His body weakened, but stubborn began to knit itself back together. The surgical scar across his back remained as a permanent reminder, a jagged mark like a river on a map. It would never fully fade, just as the memories etched into his soul would never disappear. Nora transformed their home into a sanctuary of care. Fresh flowers in the kitchen, soft music playing at dusk, meals prepared with gentle hands. She hovered without smothering, learning the delicate balance between support and respect. Maya visited every weekend, her professional eye watching her father's progress with both relief and pride. The three of them spent long evenings on the porch watching the sun sink behind the lake. Conversations that had once been impossible now flowed like the thawing streams outside. Silence was no longer a barrier, but a space where truths could finally rest. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Hank spoke of returning to Vietnam. His voice was rough, hesitant, yet certain. He wanted to see the place where his life had been fractured to stand where the lie had been born and leave it behind. Nora listened, her heart both afraid and hopeful. She understood. She had her own ghosts there, memories of the field hospital, the endless wounded faces. Roy agreed to go with them, his presence a bridge between past and present. Together, they joined a reconciliation program for veterans. When the plane lifted off the runway, Hank gripped Nora's hand tightly, his weathered knuckles pale. Through the window, the world below blurred into a mosaic of clouds and distance. Return to the source. Vietnam greeted them with a rush of humid air and vibrant color. The land had changed in 50 years, cities rising where jungles once stood, yet echoes of the past lingered in the shadows of ancient trees and narrow village paths. Hank walked slowly, leaning on a cane, his gaze sweeping over the terrain. In one small village he paused before a clearing. The others gave him space as he knelt in the red earth. Nora stood nearby, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. In his hand, Hank held the bullet fragment that Ava had returned to him after the final analysis. It had been cleaned, sealed in glass, transformed from an instrument of violence into an artifact of truth. With a deep breath, he placed it gently in the soil. The act was simple, yet profound. The weight of decades seemed to lift from his shoulders as though the land itself accepted his offering. Roy knelt beside him, whispering a few words that only Hank could hear. Nora felt her own release, her memories no longer locked in the darkness of secrecy. For the first time, she and Hank truly shared the burden. Maya watched from a distance, her heart swelling with understanding. She saw not just her parents, but the arc of history made personal, raw, and real. Homecoming. When they returned to Harbor Ridge, the lake shimmered in the golden light of summer. The Mason home felt different now, lighter, freer. Hank moved with greater strength each day, though he still tired easily. His laughter, once rare, now came more readily unguarded and genuine. One evening, as the family gathered on the porch, Nora looked at her husband and daughter. They had survived the storm together, and though scars remained, there was beauty in their shared resilience. Hank reached for Nora's hand. "We can't change the past," his voice was steady, "but we can choose what to carry forward." Nora smiled softly, knowing he spoke not just to her, but to Maya, to Roy, to every soul touched by that long-ago war. As the last light of day faded, a sense of peace settled over them. The truth had been spoken. The weight had been shared. And in its place grew something stronger than silence connection. Final reflection. The bullet had once lived within Hank's body, a silent reminder of a moment that shaped his entire life. For decades it had been a source of pain, both physical and emotional. But by facing it, by bringing it into the open, it had been transformed. The same was true for the family itself. Their secrets, once hidden now, lay in the light where healing could begin. If this journey moved you, subscribe now to join us for more powerful stories of resilience, truth, and the human heart. The night settled quietly over Harbor Ridge. From the porch, Hank, Nora, and Maya watched the stars emerge one by one. Each small light a testament to survival. The past would never vanish, but it no longer ruled them. And somewhere deep within, Hank felt the echo of the land far away where a bullet lay buried in the soil and where forgiveness had finally taken root.